Hey guys, my name is Shai and this is Evermind Astro. This video is about having your moon in Gemini. It might also resonate if you have your moon in the third house. I want to focus this video on emotional processing, right? What is emotional processing? What might that look like for a Gemini moon? Of course, it's a little different for everybody, right? But we're just looking for some common ground, some common themes on how does a Gemini moon process emotions? And right away, this is an interesting one, right? And so a little bit of disclaimer here, guys. My moon is in Gemini. I'm a Gemini moon in the 8th house. And I like to mention that because it gives me a little bit of a bias, right? In some sense, I'm an expert on Gemini moon, but on the other hand, I have a limited perspective because I only know what it's like for me, right? So just keep that in mind as you're listening and just take what resonates. So Gemini moon, the first of the air moons, and all of the air moons share something interesting in common in that you have your moon, which is that lunar energy, that internal energy, it's the emotional energy. The moon has a lot to do with your emotions, and just think of the cycles of the moons and the tides of the ocean and all of that, right? It is largely about your emotions. Of course, you also have Venus related to your emotional body, but we're talking about the moon here. So it's not entirely the moon, but largely the moon governing your emotions and how you process your emotions and everything to do with your inner landscape, right? What is going on inside of you. So it's a little bit interesting to have your moon in an air sign because the air energy is quite different from that, right? It is minded, right? Air energy is mental energy. Air energy is about the mental body and it is about thinking. It can be quite logical and it can be a little bit cold. And so you do have that present here with the Gemini energy. Gemini is so many things, and Gemini often gets a little bit of a bad rep because people often zero in on this fixation that Gemini is two-faced, right? They see the two faces, the two masks, and maybe they used to know some Gemini that was kind of duplicitous, and people think that that's what Gemini is about. But really, that is just some of the lowest possible vibing examples of Gemini energy, right? That's not really what Gemini is about. There is an element here of the twins, right? Of the energy of duality, right? The energy of polarity and exploring those expressions inside of yourself. And with Gemini, you can actually find that you are quite flexible, quite fluid, and quite adaptable, right? It is a very adaptive energy because it is mutable air energy, right? Mutable air energy. So Gemini is very quick, very intelligent. It likes to think about everything, right? Gemini likes to think about everything, and it likes to talk about everything. It likes to communicate about everything, of course governed by the particular interests of that particular Gemini moon. But if you like to listen to me talk, then you're familiar with how an 8th house Gemini moon likes to think and talk, right? I love to think constantly about the things that are invisible, the things that are unseen, the things that are hidden, right? 8th house. And I bring the Gemini energy to that, where I think about it constantly from every single different angle that I possibly can. And then I'm also here to try and articulate it verbally, to communicate it, to express it, right? All of these things are Gemini energy. So how does that relate to the moon, right? What is it like having your moon in Gemini? This is where your emotional processing ends up being at least partially an intellectual exercise, right? Gemini moon. There can even be some confusion about the difference between thoughts and feelings. And let me clarify that, right? What do I really mean when I say that? I don't mean that Gemini moons like literally can't tell the difference about whether that's a thought or a feeling, but there is this sense of it all kind of blends together, right? It all kinds of blends together. Like you might have a thought and then you immediately have a feeling that comes from the thought, and then you have a feeling and you immediately start thinking your feelings. It's like your thoughts and your feelings aren't super separated. They're kind of twine around each other, and they can be quite involved with each other, right? Whereas somebody with, I don't know, maybe moon in Cancer, right? A water moon, their emotions are one thing and then their mind is another thing. And of course, their mind and their emotional body and their mental body can still communicate and can still interact, but there's more of a separation, right? With the Gemini moon, there's much, much, much less separation. The veil is very thin between thoughts and emotions, and it's all wrapped up together. And Gemini moons are highly likely to be interested in any kind of intellectual system that helps them understand their own emotions, okay? So psychology, big one, right? Any of those psychological systems, like the Enneagram or the Big Five or the Myers-Briggs, like the 16 personalities, all of those things, because that's just one way. Those are just some examples of how Gemini moon can learn to think about their own emotions and to learn to understand their own emotions, because it's actually quite important for a Gemini moon to be able to think about their feelings, to learn to think about their feelings, right? And understand why, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? Like, is it like, do I have a good reason to feel that way, right? Can I justify that feeling? And so on and so forth. Really, really, really mentally processing those feelings and learning to explain them and be able to understand them in a way that can be explained, right? Learning to verbalize your feelings and learning to communicate your feelings. Gemini moon, there's definitely a passion there to want to have your feelings understood, and especially to want to be able to communicate your feelings verbally, right? You have a bunch of feelings, and it might, Gemini moons might be surprised to find out that some people are perfectly happy to just keep all of their feelings wrapped up inside and to never really verbalize them and to never really communicate them. Some people are perfectly happy like that. Gemini moon is going to need to communicate their feelings, right? And get those feelings out there and hopefully have them understood by at least somebody, right? And so, of course, like journaling, writing about your feelings, talking about your feelings. And I mean, really, hopefully a Gemini moon has at least one person in their life that is a good listener and can listen to Gemini moon endlessly talk about their feelings, because Gemini moon can quite endlessly talk about their feelings, because that is how they're learning to understand it, right? And while they're speaking or while they're writing, while they're thinking it through, coming into that level understanding, the verbalization of emotion and the intellectualization of feeling cannot really be overemphasized here. But what I will say is that there is a kind of a danger zone with this, right? There's a danger zone here. I mean, this is part of the Gemini thing where you're constantly the two sides of the coin, right? The opposite twins, where you're kind of bouncing back, and Gemini is going to be able to really easily see like the good and the bad about any situation, and about how both, like heads and tails, two sides of the same coin, right? You can't really have one without the other, and Gemini's usually pretty okay with that, right? You got the light and then you got the shadow, and that's just cool, right? Gemini's pretty cool with whatever is rolling its way. So what I want to kind of pivot into here is some of the challenges that Gemini moon can run into with having this highly kind of intellectualized view of emotions, right? That can become problematic, because Gemini moon, especially if you have other air emphasis in your chart, right? Like take a look at what your Mercury is doing, take a look at what your Venus is doing, right? Just to see if you have like intellectual and air energy really, really emphasized in your chart, this will be even more of a problem for you. If you have more water energy, right, more emotional energy in your chart, then maybe this will be mitigated. So it depends on you, right? But there is a potential for Gemini moon to actually shut down their emotions and to just override their emotions with their intellect and say, that emotion, that feeling, that emotional response is bullshit, doesn't make any sense, I shouldn't have it. And Gemini moon can just cut those emotions right off, because they're just not, they just don't make sense, right? Because Gemini there's kind of a thing with Gemini where Gemini can get fixated on what is true and fixated on what is real. And so if you're processing your emotions that way and you go, oh, well, my emotion doesn't make any sense and it's not really attached to reality, that means it's a bullshit emotion, and I'm just going to like erase that. I'm just going to cut it off. And this is one of those things where there is actually a benefit to this and a strength, but it has to be nuanced. This has to be really understood. And this is something a mature Gemini moon is going to be able to really cultivate, because you can easily see how cutting off your emotions and just saying like, oh, my emotions are stupid, I'm gonna just turn them off, like that's obviously a problem, right? Like that's the kind of thing that as a teenager you might kind of cultivate and think that's going to get you somewhere, but of course as you live your life you realize that you can't get anywhere by denying your emotions, right? And if you're listening to this video, you've been walking your spiritual path and you're interested in all this stuff, and you probably, now you've probably learned that you have to learn to get along with your emotions, right? You have to make your peace with your emotions, and you have to utilize your emotions because they're great strength. Cutting them off is not the way to go, right? However, the strength of this comes when Gemini moon, and I would say we have this in common with the other air moons as well, so I'll be talking about this again in the other air moon videos, but this air moon thing where you can really use this to a great benefit, because you know what, this is the thing, sometimes humans we have like unnecessary emotional reactions, right? Unnecessary, like volatile emotional reactions. And I want to differentiate for a minute here the difference between an emotional response that you then kind of go, okay, that's how I responded, and moving on, right? And an emotional reaction, which I'm using that word to mean something more volatile and something less healthy, right? Like say you spilled some milk, okay? Or whatever it is. Let's use the spilled milk analogy. Say you spill some milk, an emotional response is to go like, that's so annoying. Now I have to clean it up, and I hope my couch doesn't smell like milk later, right? And you're annoyed. And then you clean it up and like, okay, that was dumb. Moving on, right? That's like a normal emotional response. But I think like an unhealthy emotional reaction to spilled milk on the couch would be to start crying and to get really upset and to get so frustrated and be like, why am I always doing stupid stuff like that? And why does this stuff have to happen? And like, why didn't my guide stop that from happening? And like, and just getting like really upset about it, right? And of course, this is about anything that's going on in life, right? And sometimes we do that about big things, and sometimes we do that about small things. But to contrast an air moon with a water moon, the water moons will really struggle to stop having volatile emotional reactions to things that just don't necessarily like need that much of an emotional reaction, right? Whereas an air moon, especially a Gemini moon, will be like, well, a Gemini moon can really cultivate like an attitude that sees them through this, right? Okay, where they can spill the milk and kind of laugh about it, and spill the milk and go, okay, yeah, I'm having some feelings about this. I get my feelings. I get that they're real, and I'm going to validate my feelings. Like I'm going to go, okay, yeah, I spilled the milk. I'm annoyed. I'm frustrated. I'm upset. It's okay for me to feel that way. I'm going to feel that way really, really fast and just kind of get it out. And then I'm going to like move on with my day, right? And there can be this feeling of recognizing your emotions really quickly, validating your own emotions really quickly, saying, yeah, it's okay if I'm upset that I spilled the milk. It's normal. I'm a human. I get to have my emotions, right? But I don't want to like wallow in these emotions forever, right? I kind of want to get to the end of this emotional reaction or emotional response and get on with my life, right? And that's a good thing about Gemini energy, especially with a Gemini moon, is that it's quite fast, right? Gemini energy can be really, really quick. And I know in some videos I talk so fast, people complain that they can't like follow me, right? And that's the speed of Gemini thinking. And we're trying to talk as fast as we think. And we like to process our emotions that quickly either, because with an air moon, especially the Gemini moon, it is actually hard to have sustained emotions for like a long time, right? In contrast with a Pisces moon can sustain an emotional experience for like years even, right? Gemini moon, we can be a little all over the place in our internal landscape, right? And especially with our emotions can be all over the place really quickly. And we can't necessarily, unless we have something else in our charts going on that would be influencing this, right? We can't necessarily have a very long, protracted, sustained emotional experience. So it's actually quite good that we can process our emotions quickly and then move on to the next thing. And that can help us when, we're in some kind of unpleasant emotional reaction that we want to get through. We can just talk ourselves through it, right? We can say, okay, I'm observing my feelings. I'm validating my feelings. My feelings are okay. I'm going to express my feelings really quickly here. And then, okay, now I'm over it. I'm feeling good, ready to move on, right? Ready to move on. And that can be really, really good. So essentially with Gemini moon, there's a balance that needs to be struck here, right? Between the two sides of the coin, the two faces of the mask, between just completely going robotic, going completely air energy, right? Going completely like mentalizing your emotions all of the time and allowing your mental body to completely shut down and override your emotions. You don't want that. That is not going to get you where you want to go in life, right? That's going to create problems for you down the road. But if you can kind of use some of that energy, right? Your ability to think about your emotions, your ability to kind of talk yourself through a situation and go, okay, maybe I can dial down my emotional response. Maybe I can get another perspective on this, right? Maybe I can just simmer down and chill out and cultivate a different perspective, cultivate a different attitude, and just kind of get through this and move on rather quickly. Then you can do that like while still honoring your emotions, right? Really, really important for Gemini moon to figure out how to think about their emotions and to think through their emotions and to learn how to essentially balance the mental body with the emotional body. And I would say Gemini moon, that's kind of the two faces here, right? One of the faces is the emotional body and the other face is the mental body. And you really need to get those in balance, right? You really, really need to get those in balance. And when you do, it's a little bit like a superpower. And I mean, this is my bias here, right? Because I'm a Gemini moon, but this is my bias. I feel like we have a superpower because we can process our emotions really quickly when we've learned that skill. We can walk ourselves through any kind of emotional upheaval very well, and we can dial down our own emotional reactivity while still allowing ourselves to experience emotional richness and allowing ourselves the compassion of understanding that, yeah, I'm a human, I'm allowed to have whatever feelings I'm having, but that doesn't mean that they need to get really blown out of proportion, and it doesn't mean that they need to drag me down, and I don't need to wallow in them, right? I can just process my emotions really effectively and efficiently and with a lot of just smoothness and flow of moving on out to your next experience, right? So I could probably talk about Gemini moon for hours more, but I will leave this video there. I have lots of links down below if you want to check me out, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.